The Triton pirate outpost wasn't actually on Triton. Nobody alive seemed to know why it was called that. The station floated several thousand kilometers above Neptune's moon, held together by salvage, stubbornness, and a maintenance budget that had apparently died years ago. Julian Coldwell liked it. Mostly because nobody asked questions. In the years following the corporation wars that had become surprisingly valuable, the station rotated slowly outside the viewport of the wayward prospect. The mining ship had seen better days, but then again, so had Julian, 37 years old, former sector resource coordinator. Former corporate management, former citizen of a civilization that actually worked, current pirate, current scavenger, current owner of a ship whose maintenance records consisted primarily of crossed fingers and optimistic assumptions. Julian sat in the pilot's chair staring at his account balance, 4,218 credits. The number hadn't improved no matter how many times he looked at it. Maybe it's broken. The ship remained silent. Julian tapped the display. Still 4,218. Definitely broken. Financial systems operating normally. Julian sighed. The ship's computer had no sense of humor. Or perhaps it had too much. After 5 years together, it was difficult to tell. Outside, Neptune filled half the sky. Beautiful, blue, completely useless. Earth was somewhere on the other side of the solar system. The thought still felt strange. He had spent most of his life managing resource contracts for Helios resource acquisition. Back then Earth had been a destination. Now it was a dream. The corporation wars had changed everything. Trade routes collapsed. Entire sectors disappeared. Stations vanished. Governments became suggestions. The link gate network fragmented. And millions of people found themselves stranded far from where they had expected to spend the rest of their lives. Julian happened to be one of them. A chime sounded from the ship's communications panel. Incoming broadcast. Cargo carrier Black Tide destination. Jupiter region departure. 3 hours. Julian leaned forward. Now that was interesting. The Black Tide wasn't much to look at. A salvaged pirate hangar ship held together by repairs layered on top of older repairs. But it was heading inward, closer to Earth, closer to civilization, closer to home. The captain had agreed to transport contractors willing to work in Jupiter space. Julian didn't particularly enjoy working for pirates. Unfortunately, pirates were currently the only people hiring. Life was full of difficult choices. The intercom crackled. Contractors report to docking ring 4, departure in 2 hours. Julian stood. The chair protested, his back protested louder. Getting old. Medical records indicate, don't. The computer stopped talking, for once. Julian grabbed his jacket and headed for the airlock. The Black Tide was ugly, not ugly in the traditional sense. Ugly in the way that only a ship repaired by desperate people could be. Entire sections of armor didn't match. 3 different manufacturers were visible on the outer hull. One engine appeared newer than the rest of the ship. Another looked older than humanity. The pirate captain met the arriving contractors near the main docking bay. She looked exactly like somebody who commanded a pirate carrier. Scarred, tired, armed, suspicious. Coldwell, Julian nodded. Still know how to run mining equipment. I spent 12 years managing resource extraction operations. The captain stared at him. That wasn't my question. Julian sighed. Yes, good. She handed him a data pad. Jupiter's paying well for salvagers right now. Why? Solar activity. That usually means trouble. Exactly. Julian signed the contract. Trouble usually paid better. The carrier departed 3 hours later. Neptune slowly shrank behind them. The blue giant faded into darkness. Julian stood alone in an observation corridor watching it disappear. 5 years. 5 years since everything had gone wrong. 5 years since the retreat. 5 years since the Panonia II. The memory remained painfully clear. A corporate hangar ship, emergency withdrawal, pirate attacks, system failures, panic, then the jump, an untargeted emergency jump, the kind nobody wanted to perform, the kind people rarely survived. Julian had been detached on a resource acquisition operation when it happened, left behind, forgotten, abandoned. The Panonia II vanished. Everyone assumed it had been destroyed, Julian included, at least eventually. The first year he'd hoped they'd come back. The second year he'd hoped somebody would find them. The third year he'd stopped asking. By the 4th year he'd convinced himself he didn't care. The 5th year had mostly been spent lying to himself. A soft vibration passed through the carrier. Jump systems charging. The stars outside distorted. Space folded. Then Jupiter space swallowed them whole. Julian smiled for the first time in days. 1 step closer. Not much, but enough. The pirate captain's voice echoed through the carrier. Welcome to Jupiter, ladies and gentlemen. A pause. Try not to die. Julian nodded thoughtfully. Reasonable advice, historically difficult to follow, still worth trying. The outer foundry zone looked exactly how Julian remembered corporate expansion projects looking right before somebody ran out of money. Half-finished stations drifted between active construction platforms. Abandoned cargo containers floated beside refineries still trying to meet production quotas. Old mining facilities shared space with new salvage operations. Nothing matched. Nothing made sense, everything somehow worked anyway. The wayward prospect exited the hangar corridor and coasted into the sector. The navigation display immediately filled with transponder contacts. Mining ships, freighters, construction vessels, salvagers, a few pirates pretending not to be pirates. Business as usual. Julian leaned back in his chair and studied the traffic. Looks busy. Current sector population exceeds recommended navigation density by 42%. C. Busy. The computer remained unconvinced. A station beacon flashed nearby. Outer foundry exchange resource contracts available. Julian grinned. Now that sounded promising. The station was larger than most of the facilities he'd seen since the war. Not because it was well maintained, because nobody had gotten around to dismantling it yet. Docking traffic moved constantly around the outer ring. Cargo haulers loaded processed ore. Construction ships unloaded materials. Repair crews crawled across hull sections like ants attempting to hold civilization together through sheer determination. The docking controller guided the wayward prospect toward an available berth. Julian followed the instructions mostly. The docking controller sounded surprised when he arrived intact. Inside the station, the atmosphere smelled of stale air, machine lubricant, and poor financial decisions. Julian immediately felt at home, or at least the home he grew to know over the last 5 years. Workers crowded every corridor. Conversations echoed through the station, most of them centered around one topic. Salvage. Julian stopped near a market kiosk. A group of salvagers sat around a table arguing loudly. One of them slammed a datapad down. "I'm telling you the debris field wasn't there last week." Another rolled his eyes. "You say that every week. This one is different." "They're always different." Julian ordered a cup of coffee from a nearby dispenser. The machine hissed, needing repairs. Something dark emerged, hopefully coffee. Good enough. He took a seat nearby. The conversation continued. "Lockwee Station is already issuing recovery contracts." "Seriously?" "Yeah." "Heard they're paying bonuses." That got Julian's attention. Bonuses were his favorite kind of credits, mostly because they involved credits. "What caused it?" somebody asked. The salvager shrugged. "Solar activity." "Solar activity doesn't move ships." "Apparently this one did. That's not how physics works." The first salvager took a drink. "Tell that to the debris field." Julian couldn't help himself. He leaned over. "What debris field?" The group looked at him. The oldest among them shrugged. "Europa region." Julian waited. The salvager waited. Eventually Julian realized that was apparently the entire answer. "That's it. That's all I know." "What kind of debris?" "No clue." "Military." "Maybe." "Corporate." "Maybe." "Valuable." The salvager smiled. "Probably." That was enough. Another worker joined the conversation. "You hear about Darkhen Drift." The table immediately grew quieter. Julian noticed that people only lowered their voices when discussing one of two things: pirates or things that scared pirates. "What about it?" "Ships." "What ships?" "Nobody knows." Julian raised an eyebrow. That wasn't reassuring. The worker leaned closer. "People keep reporting contacts." "Whose?" "No registry. No faction. No transponder." "Pirates." "No." "Then what?" The worker shrugged. "Nobody's gotten close enough to find out." The table went silent. Julian disliked mysteries. Mysteries rarely paid as well as rumors claimed. They did, however, have a habit of exploding. The coffee somehow tasted worse on the second sip. Hours later Julian sat aboard the wayward prospect reviewing his options. The station's contract board displayed dozens of jobs. Most paid poorly. Some paid terribly. A few paid suspiciously well. Those were usually the dangerous ones. Current credits, 4,218 projected credits required to buy passage toward Earth. An amount best described as offensive. Julian sighed. Every time he got closer to Earth the price somehow increased. The station network chimed. New salvage notice. Europa region increased debris activity detected. Recovery opportunities available. Lockwee Station purchasing salvage at premium rates. Then the station network chimed again. New contract notice. Darkhen Drift post-solar event sector scan. 2,500 credits. Delivery Lockwee Station. Julian smiled and accepted the contract. That sounded much better than hauling ore, and it was along the way. He entered a course into the navigation computer. Destination, Darkhen Drift. The computer processed the command. "Warning, here we go. Unusual sensor reports have been logged within the destination sector." Julian nodded. "Yeah, that happens after solar storms. That's why we're going. Probability of encountering unknown hazards exceeds 70%. Only 70, you sure? The computer paused, recalculating. Julian laughed. The engines powered up, the docking clamps released. The wayward prospect eased away from the station. Outside the viewport, the station slowly drifted against the backdrop of Jupiter's distant glow. For the first time in years, he felt something resembling optimism. There was salvage out there, maybe enough to buy passage farther inward, maybe enough to get closer to Earth, maybe enough to finally stop living contract to contract. Julian settled into the pilot's chair. Let's go make some money. The computer considered this. Historical data suggests otherwise. Julian pointed at the display. That's exactly the kind of negativity that keeps us poor. The jump drive began charging. Ahead of him waited Darkhen Drift, unknown ships. Fresh wreckage, potential profits. And though he didn't know it yet, one of the worst ideas he'd had all year, which was saying something. The jump into Darkhen Drift was uneventful. That immediately worried Julian. In his experience, the universe only gave you calm moments so it could surprise you with something unpleasant later. The wayward prospect emerged from the jump corridor and drifted into the sector. Immediately the sensors lit up. Well, Julian leaned forward. That's a lot of debris. The computer considered the statement. Confirmed. The solar storm hadn't simply pushed a few wrecks into the sector. It had apparently attempted to relocate an entire scrapyard. Broken freighters drifted through the darkness. Cargo containers tumbled end over end. Sections of station hull floated among shattered solar arrays. One particularly large piece of wreckage looked suspiciously like an entire docking arm. Julian wasn't entirely sure how someone lost a docking arm. He also wasn't entirely sure he wanted to know. The contract scanner immediately began recording data. Survey progress, 4%, easy money. Historical data suggests otherwise. Julian ignored the computer. Again, the first hour passed quietly. He catalogued wreckage, recorded transponder signatures, scanned debris fields, marked salvage locations. The contract was progressing nicely. Survey progress, 43%, Julian smiled. Maybe this would actually be easy. Then the sensors detected a ship. His smile disappeared. That's new. The contact floated near the edge of the debris field. Small, unidentified, silent. Julian checked the transponder database. Nothing. Unknown contact detected. No kidding. The vessel simply sat there. No movement, no communications, no identification signal. Julian increased magnification. The ship looked wrong. Not damaged, not alien, just wrong. Its shape didn't match anything he recognized. No corporate markings, no pirate modifications, no manufacturing signatures. Maybe that's what the station workers were talking about. The computer remained silent. A second contact appeared, then a third, then a fourth, all motionless, all silent. Julian frowned. Okay, that's mildly concerning. He adjusted course. Just enough to get a closer look and position the ship towards an escape vector. The nearest contact immediately accelerated, directly toward him. Julian blinked. That's not my favorite thing to see. The ship accelerated harder, straight at him. No, 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 no. The unknown vessel slammed into the wayward prospect. The impact shook the entire ship. Hull integrity, 94% warning alarms sounded. Julian stared at the display. The display stared back. What just happened? The computer answered. Collision with an unknown object. Julian with regret replied, thank you. Another contact accelerated. Oh, come on. The second ship slammed into his port side. Hull integrity, 89%. Julian immediately engaged maneuvering thrusters. The mining ship rolled further away from the debris field towards the escape vector. The unknown vessels followed, not firing, not communicating, just accelerating, straight toward him. A third collision struck the stern. Hull integrity, 84%. Julian finally reached a conclusion. They are aliens and they are crazy. The computer remained silent. They have to be. Another collision. Hull integrity, 81%. No human would build something this stupid. The nearest contact turned around, accelerated, and attempted to hit him again. Julian watched it happen, slowly, very slowly. The realization dawned on him. They aren't attacking. The computer offered no opinion. They're playing. Pause. They're trying to play space pong. Another collision warning flashed. Julian immediately rolled the ship. The unknown vessel missed by several meters. Absolutely not. The contact turned around for another attempt. Oh, we're definitely playing space pong. A fourth vessel joined the chase. Julian shoved the throttle forward. The wayward prospect accelerated down the edge of the debris field, down the escape vector he planned earlier. The unknown ships followed, every single one of them attempting to ram him. No weapons, no communications, no apparent survival instinct. One smashed into a cargo container. Another clipped an asteroid, a third collided with one of its friends. Julian watched the chaos unfold behind him. "These things are idiots." "Unknown," replied the computer. "They just rammed each other." "Confirmed, they're alien idiots." The computer once again refused to comment. Minutes later, the jump drive finally charged. Julian looked at the navigation display. Nearest safe destination, Lockwee Station region, good enough. The unknown contacts were still approaching. One somehow managed to hit the same damaged armor plate twice. Hull integrity, 76%, that's it. Julian slammed the jump controls. Space distorted, the stars stretched, reality folded. Darkhen Drift vanished behind him. The jump completed several seconds later. Julian sat quietly in his chair. The silence lasted nearly a minute. Finally, he leaned back. "I hate this system." The computer processed that statement. "Sector survey complete. Contract value 2,500 credits." Julian smiled. "Well, pause. Not a total loss." The ship suddenly reported new structural damage. Hull integrity, 75%. Julian sighed. "Never mind." Ahead of him, the Lockwee Station region slowly appeared on the sensors. A safe harbor, a place to repair his ship. A place to sell salvage, and hopefully a place where nobody was trying to play space pong, though given his recent luck, he wasn't willing to bet on it. The Lockwee Station region was considerably less hostile than Darkhen Drift, which wasn't saying much. The moment the wayward prospect exited the jump corridor, Julian noticed the difference. No unidentified ships, no collision warnings, no aliens attempting to use him in a 1972 arcade game, just debris, a lot of debris. The solar storm had left its mark. Broken station components drifted throughout the sector. Cargo containers floated between asteroid clusters. Damaged freighters rotated slowly through the darkness. Julian checked the hull status display. Hull integrity, 75%. The number bothered him, not because it was dangerous, because it wasn't. The ship would survive just fine. But every damaged plate made ugly noises during acceleration, and Julian hated ugly noises, and more importantly, spending credits for repairs. Ahead of him, a station marker appeared on sensors. Unknown station status, offline power, 0% life support, offline. Julian raised an eyebrow. Now that's interesting. The station drifted alone near the edge of the debris field, large enough to have once supported hundreds of workers. Now it sat dark and abandoned. The occasional navigation light flickered weakly across its hull. "Can we repair it?" The computer processed the scan. "Negative. Why, what's wrong with it?" "Everything." Julian nodded. "Fair." He adjusted course. The wayward prospect slowly approached the derelict. The computer chimed. Scanners online. At close range, the damage became obvious. Entire sections of the station were missing. Several habitation modules had been torn completely away. Large impact scars covered the outer hull. Something had killed the station, and it had done a thorough job. The scanner immediately highlighted useful materials. Construction components, armor plating, power relays. Industrial wiring, storage systems. Julian smiled. Now this looked profitable. For the next several hours, he worked his way through the wreck. Salvage drones pulled damaged armor plates free. Cargo cranes recovered spare components. Repair systems installed the best parts directly onto the wayward prospect. Slowly, the hull damage disappeared. Hull integrity, 92%, much better. Confirmed. The ship agreed, for once. Deeper inside the station, he found something unexpected. A sealed storage bay. The blast doors resisted for several minutes before finally opening. The interior lights flickered weakly. Julian floated inside. Rows of storage containers lined the walls. Most were empty. Some contained scrap. A few still held useful supplies. The inventory scanner highlighted several containers. Ice chunks, defense drones, fighter hangar components. Julian blinked. Well, that was significantly better than scrap metal. The defense drones caught his attention first. 12 units, mostly intact. The kind corporations used to protect mining facilities and remote stations. Julian smiled. Now we're talking. The memory of Darkhen Drift was still fresh. If the space pong aliens showed up again, having a few automated guns around sounded appealing. Several hours later, the drones were deployed around the station. The small machines powered up without issue. Navigation systems online. Targeting systems online. Propulsion systems online. Everything appeared operational. Julian watched from the bridge. Not bad. The drones began slowly circling the station. Professional, disciplined, competent, at least for the first few minutes. Then he attempted a weapons test. Target asteroid. No response. Defense Drone 1 engage target. Nothing. Julian frowned. Defense Drone 1 fire weapons. Nothing. One of the drones slowly rotated in place. Another drifted sideways. A third appeared fascinated by a nearby cargo container. Julian checked the diagnostics. Weapon systems, offline all drones, every single one. You're kidding me. The drones were fully functional, except for the guns, the one thing they were specifically designed to use. Julian watched one of them gently bump into a station antenna. The drone reversed, paused, then bumped into it again. Outstanding, he thought. Another drone slowly drifted through a cloud of debris. A third began orbiting a broken solar panel for reasons known only to itself. Julian sighed, so you're useless. The drones continued their important mission of accomplishing absolutely nothing. He considered dismantling them, then changed his mind. If nothing else, they looked intimidating. Maybe that counted for something. The storage bay held one final surprise, a cargo container filled with ice chunks. Julian grinned. Now that was useful. Water had become one of the most valuable commodities in the outer system. He loaded them in the refinery and immediately began processing them. Several minutes later, the operation completed. Julian checked the storage display. Water storage, 0. He stared, the display stared back. Water storage, 0. Julian slowly stood. No, he whispered. The refinery hummed happily. I just watched you process that. No response. Where did it go? No response. Julian rubbed his temples. The water gnomes. The computer remained silent. The water gnomes are back. Still silence. Don't pretend you don't know. He glared. No response. Julian sighed. There was only one solution, the universal solution. Turn it off, turn it back on. The ship's systems powered down. Darkness filled the bridge. Several moments later, the startup sequence began. Lights flickered, displays activated, systems initialized. Then the familiar voice returned. All systems online, Captain. Starminer Framework version 0.33.5.0. Patch 4. All systems green. The computer paused for a second. Julian stared at the console. I hate whoever programmed you. The computer ignored him. Water storage, 156, there you are. The water-stealing gnomes had apparently retreated. For now, with the ship repaired and cargo holds partially filled, Julian finally set course for Lockwee Station. It was time to sell salvage. Collect his contract payment, and hopefully spend a few hours around people who weren't aliens, broken drones, or software engineers. Unfortunately, the fate had other plans. Lockwee Station looked surprisingly alive. After the abandoned station and the nonsense he'd encountered in Darkhen Drift, Julian had expected something halfway between a scrapyard and a funeral. Instead, the station was busy. Docking traffic moved constantly around the outer ring. Cargo haulers arrived every few minutes. Salvage ships lined up outside the processing bays. Construction crews worked on expansion platforms attached to the station's spine. The solar storm had apparently been very good for business, which meant it was probably very bad for everyone else. The wayward prospect eased into an available docking berth. For once, nothing exploded. Nobody rammed him. No mysterious aliens appeared. No water disappeared. By recent standards, it was shaping up to be an excellent day, aside from the dockmaster's awful personality, cutthroat tone, and debt collector's appearance. Docking successful. Julian stood from the pilot's chair. Easy. The computer paused. Historical data suggests this situation will deteriorate shortly. Julian pointed at the ceiling. That's exactly the kind of negativity I was talking about. The computer wisely chose silence. The station's market district was packed. Workers moved between cargo exchanges. Salvagers negotiated contracts. Merchants argued over prices. A station official was attempting to explain regulations to a dock worker. Neither appeared to be enjoying the conversation. Julian headed directly toward the salvage exchange. Business first, complaining later. The station clerk looked exhausted. Next. Julian transferred the salvage manifest. Scrap iron, scrap silicate, scrap cobalt, scrap thorium, 15 units of Eonite fuel. The clerk reviewed the list. Not bad, I know. Feeling proud despite the computer's recent reminders, Julian smirked, coming from Darkhen Drift. Julian immediately frowned. How did you know? The clerk pointed at a dent visible through the viewport. Your ship, fair. Several moments later, the payment finalized. Credits deposited, 24,921. Julian smiled. Now that was progress, not enough progress. But progress, Earth remained offensively expensive, yet slightly less offensive than yesterday. He rewarded himself with a cup of station coffee. The machine produced something that technically met the legal requirements for liquid, which was depressing considering the price of water these days. Julian sat near a viewport overlooking the docking bays. The station bustled around him. Workers moved equipment. Cargo shuttles launched and landed. A pair of salvagers argued over ownership of a damaged storage container. Apparently both believed they had found it first. The argument seemed likely to become violent. Julian moved farther away. A group of dock workers occupied the next table. Their conversation drifted across the room. I've never seen anything like it. Same. Huge ship. Julian ignored them, at least initially. Whole station was talking about it. His attention shifted slightly, unable to enjoy his overpriced coffee in peace. How long was it drifting? No clue. Looked abandoned. Julian took another sip. It still worked, apparently. That caught his attention. Old ships that still worked usually contained expensive things, or horrible things, sometimes both. What kind of ship was it? The worker shrugged. Hangar ship. Julian froze. The coffee suddenly became less important. Military. No, corporate, maybe. The worker leaned back. Huge hangar ship. Julian slowly lowered his cup and joined the conversation abruptly. Where? The workers looked over. Debris field. Which debris field? The worker pointed toward the viewport. One near here. Julian stood. His stomach suddenly felt uncomfortable, looking out the viewport. What was its name? The workers exchanged glances. One shrugged. Panonia II. You could notice the silence. The noise of the station disappeared. The conversations, the machinery, the docking traffic, everything. For a moment all Julian heard was his own heartbeat. No, the worker frowned. What? Julian stared. What did you say? Panonia II. The worker pointed toward the viewport. Big old carrier. Julian sat back down, slowly. 5 years. 5 years of wondering. 5 years of assuming it had been destroyed. 5 years of convincing himself he didn't care. Apparently he had been lying. The worker continued talking. Some guy found it. Julian blinked. What? Yeah, found it where? Drifting. The worker shrugged. Nobody knows where it came from. It was swept in by the solar storm. Another worker laughed. Guy hit the jackpot. Julian already knew that. What happened to it? The answer came immediately. He fixed it. Pause, then jumped away. Julian closed his eyes. Of course he did. The universe had a sense of humor. A terrible sense of humor, but a sense of humor nonetheless. The Panonia II had survived. The ship that abandoned him. The ship he'd cursed for years. The ship he'd wanted to find so badly. The ship that could potentially take him home. Found, recovered, repaired, gone again, and he'd missed it, again. How long ago? The worker thought about it. Couple days. Julian laughed. The workers looked confused. You okay? No. Need another coffee? Definitely not. It tastes bitter now. Julian stood. A couple days after 5 years. A couple days. He started walking back toward the docks. The worker called after him. Hey, Julian stopped. What? There's been sightings. Julian turned. Sightings. The worker nodded. People say they saw it heading toward Jupiter Gate. Hope was a dangerous thing. Julian had spent years learning that lesson. Apparently he hadn't learned it well enough. Because despite everything, despite the anger, despite the disappointment, despite the fact that the corporation had effectively abandoned him, the Panonia II, the ship that could take him home, he still wanted to find it. He still wanted answers, and somewhere deep down, he still wanted to go home. An hour later the wayward prospect undocked from Lockwee Station. The navigation computer displayed a new course. Destination, Jupiter Gate. Julian stared at it for several moments. The computer finally spoke. Probability of disappointment remains high. Julian settled into the pilot's chair. Yeah, but I have you to keep my spirit high, don't I? The jump drive began charging. Probability unlikely. Outside the station viewport, Lockwee Station slowly drifted away. Behind him lay 5 years of unanswered questions. Ahead of him was the first real lead he'd had since the day the Panonia II vanished. The jump drive reached full charge. Julian took one last look at the station. Then the stars stretched into lines. And he jumped, dropping out of the jump partway. He took a moment to relax. While relaxing, he had an idea. The idea seemed brilliant at the time. Looking back, Julian would eventually classify it alongside several of his other life decisions. Joining a pirate operation, trusting corporate management, drinking station coffee, and that unfortunate incident involving a mining laser and an automated toilet. Some ideas simply aged poorly. The wayward prospect drifted through interplanetary space between Lockwee Station and Jupiter Gate. The jump drive cooled quietly. The engines hummed. For the first time in several days, nothing appeared to be actively trying to kill him. Julian decided to ruin that. He stared at the cargo manifest. Recovered equipment, defense drone components, fighter hangar module, miscellaneous salvage. The fighter hangar module sat at the bottom of the list. You know, the computer immediately interrupted. No, Julian frowned. I haven't said anything yet. Historical data indicates the proposed idea is poor. How do you know what I'm thinking? Pattern recognition. Julian pointed accusingly at the display. That's creepy. The computer remained silent, which Julian interpreted as guilt. Several hours later, the fighter hangar sat bolted to the underside of the ship. It looked surprisingly good, professional, military, capable. Julian should have recognized that as a warning sign. The fighter itself emerged from storage shortly afterward. Small, compact, armed. For a brief moment he felt optimistic. Look at that. The fighter rotated slowly on the external camera feed. That actually looks useful. The computer chose not to comment, probably because it didn't want to laugh. Julian opened the control interface. Crew required. 1. Julian stared. No. The interface remained unchanged. Crew required. 1. Julian rubbed his eyes. Please tell me that's a typo. Negative. Why does a fighter the size of an automated cargo drone need crew? No information available. Why can't it fly on its own? Unknown. Julian checked the hiring costs for new crew members on the network. 1,000 credits and 1 unit of water. He nearly choked. 1,000 credits. Confirmed. To hire 1 pilot. Confirmed. 1,000. Confirmed. Julian looked out the viewport, then back at the screen, then back out the viewport, as though reality might have changed. It had not. Who approved this joke? The computer remained silent. Julian suspected even it was embarrassed. Several hours later, and deep questions on how 1 unit of water turns into a person, the fighter launched. The tiny vessel emerged from the hangar bay and drifted clear of the wayward prospect. Julian sat inside the cockpit. To his surprise, it felt good. Responsive controls, excellent visibility, okay acceleration. Maybe he'd been wrong. Maybe this was finally something useful. The fighter accelerated away from the ship. 500 meters, 700, 900, everything worked perfectly. Julian smiled. See, the computer said nothing. Distance 1001 meters, warning, connection lost. The fighter froze. Julian blinked. What? Connection lost. What? The computer paused, then repeated. Connection lost. What the heck? The fighter's controls became unresponsive. The engines shut down, the displays flickered. Julian stared at the console. The console stared back. You're joking. The fighter remained exactly where it was, drifting, a very expensive paperweight floating in space. Several minutes later, he managed to drift back within range, manually firing the thrusters. The systems immediately returned. Julian sat quietly. The silence lasted nearly 30 seconds. 1 kilometer. The computer offered no defense. 1 kilometer. Still nothing. I can throw a wrench farther than that. That wasn't technically true, although Julian felt it was spiritually true. The next test went better, at least initially. He located a small asteroid, activated the fighter's weapons, and opened fire. The plasma cannons spat bright bolts into the darkness. Chunks of rock vaporized. The asteroid broke apart. Julian nodded. Okay, not terrible. The weapons continued firing, then stopped. Weapon charge depleted, the computer noted. Julian frowned. He pulled the trigger again. Nothing. Pulled it again. Nothing. One more time. Still nothing. Why aren't they firing? The computer checked the diagnostics. Weapon charge depleted. Recharge them. He groaned. Unable. Why? Fighter must return to hangar. Julian blinked. Excuse me. Weapon systems recharge through hangar connection. The computer explained. Silence. Long silence. Very long silence. So, he paused. The weapons only work until they run out. Correct, and then I have to fly home. Correct, and recharge. Correct. Julian slowly lowered his head against the console. The universe clearly hated him. There was no other explanation. Several hours later, the fighter docked with the hangar. Julian sat in the cargo bay staring at it. The fighter sat there staring back. Crew cost 1,000 credits, water consumption, increased maximum range, approximately 1 kilometer weapon endurance, questionable combat effectiveness, debatable. Julian looked at the fighter, then at the resource market, then back at the fighter, then at the recycling terminal. The decision took less than 10 seconds. Congratulations, he said. The fighter remained silent. You are officially the most expensive piece of junk I have ever owned. The recycling terminal accepted the transfer. Moments later, the fighter ceased to exist. Resource gain, moderately disappointing, Julian sighed. At least the materials were useful. The hangar followed shortly afterward. More salvage, more resources, one less problem. No regrets, well, almost none. After the failed experiment, he decided it was best to keep going before finding another disappointment to add to his day. The navigation display chimed. Destination approaching, Jupiter Gate. Julian settled back into the pilot's chair. The Panonia II might be out there, somewhere, and if it was, he needed every credit he could get, even if he occasionally had to learn expensive lessons to earn them. Behind him, somewhere in deep space, floated the memory of the shortest-lived fighter program in human history. Julian considered that a public service, Jupiter Gate, was impossible to miss. Even before the wayward prospect completed its jump, the massive structure dominated the navigation display. The link gate hung in space like a monument to a civilization that had once been far more competent than the current one. Whether that civilization had actually existed remained open to debate. The jump completed. The sector unfolded around him. Traffic immediately flooded the sensors. Freighters, miners, construction vessels, corporate transports, independent traders, the occasional pirate pretending to be an independent trader, normal space, normal people, normal problems. Julian relaxed slightly. After Darkhen Drift, normal sounded wonderful. The computer highlighted a nearby station. Estimated docking wait, 3 hours. Julian frowned. 3 hours, current traffic exceeds recommended operational density. Everybody says that. The computer chose not to argue. Julian adjusted course. He wasn't in a hurry, not yet. The Panonia II could wait a little longer. It had already kept him waiting 5 years. Several construction markers appeared near the edge of the sector. New build site. Julian laughed. Well, that's optimistic. The reconstruction site consisted of several partially completed structures. Most looked functional, one looked concerning. A T4 solar factory. The massive structure rotated slowly around its central axis. Thousands of solar collection panels extended outward like metallic wings. Julian zoomed in. The factory spun slightly faster. He frowned. Was it doing that before? The computer checked. Unknown. The array spun faster. Julian stared. Okay, he paused. That doesn't seem right. The computer remained neutral. The factory mysteriously accelerated again. Its rotation became noticeably faster. Several nearby construction ships suddenly altered course, confused how to continue. That seemed significant. Julian watched. The factory continued accelerating. What exactly am I looking at? Industrial solar collection facility. No, he said. Julian pointed at the screen. The other thing, the computer remained silent, which wasn't encouraging. The station spun faster, then significantly faster. The entire structure became a blur. Nearby construction vessels began leaving. Rapidly. Julian sat forward. They know something. The factory suddenly drifted sideways, very slightly, then more, then noticeably. Julian blinked. Is the station moving? The computer checked, confirmed. Stations aren't supposed to move. Generally correct, the computer stated. The factory accelerated. Not rotationally, actually accelerated, forward into open space. Julian stared. The factory continued gaining speed. Construction crews scattered in every direction. Several attempted to pursue it. The attempt lasted approximately 20 seconds. The station was somehow accelerating faster than the drones. Julian slowly removed his coffee from the console. This felt like the kind of situation where coffee should not be nearby. The factory continued departing reality. What exactly is happening? The computer considered the question. Unknown. You're helpful, he responded. The station accelerated farther. Soon it had cleared the construction zone entirely. Then it cleared sensor range. Julian watched the marker shrink and shrink and shrink until it vanished. Silence filled the bridge. The entire sector seemed confused. Several moments passed. Then a bright flash illuminated the darkness beyond sensor range. Julian stared. The flash faded. The marker never returned. Well, the computer waited. I think we can safely classify that as a failed test. No response. Julian leaned back. I spent 12 years working corporate logistics. He paused. Not once did anyone mention solar power requiring escape velocity. Still no response. Research project. Had to be, he said casually. The computer finally spoke. Probability of research project, 13%. Julian nodded. Exactly. That statement does not align with the previous probability. Julian ignored the computer, like every good manager before him. The navigation display suddenly chimed. New contact detected. The alert appeared near the edge of the sector. A jump signature. Large, very large. Julian frowned. Most ships entering through Jupiter Gate were visible on traffic control channels long before arrival. This one wasn't. The jump signature intensified. Energy readings climbed. Higher than he had seen in years. The distortion expanded. Traffic around the gate immediately began clearing. Several ships changed course. Station traffic control issued navigation warnings. Something big was arriving. Very big. Julian sat forward. The jump vortex blossomed into existence. For a brief moment the stars disappeared behind a wall of blue-white energy. Then a ship emerged. Massive, old, scarred, familiar. Julian stopped breathing. No, the vessel continued emerging from the jump corridor. hangar bays, industrial sections. External cargo modules, an overly large cannon 1/3 the size of the ship, corporate architecture, his heart hammered in his chest. No way. The transponder finally resolved. Panonia II. Julian stared at the display. 5 years of questions. 5 years of anger, 5 years of wondering, and there it was, real, alive, the ship that had abandoned him, the ship that might finally have answers, the ship that might finally get him home. The Panonia II drifted near Jupiter Gate. For the first time in years, Julian felt hope. For several seconds, Julian simply stared at the display. The Panonia II, after 5 years, after all the rumors, after all the dead ends, after all the disappointment, it was actually here. The massive hangar ship drifted near the gate, while traffic control desperately attempted to reorganize local traffic around it. The carrier looked different than Julian remembered. Additional armor plates covered portions of the hull. Several damaged sections had been repaired. New structures protruded from areas that had once been empty. Whoever had recovered it had been busy. Julian zoomed the image. The old corporate markings were still visible beneath the repairs. For the first time in years, memories resurfaced. Long shifts, resource reports, crew briefings, arguments with management, the routine monotony of corporate life. Back when he had believed he'd retire on Earth, back before everything went wrong, the Panonia II slowly rotated. Julian couldn't stop staring. I'll be damned. The computer remained silent, even it seemed to understand the moment. Then a launch bay opened. Julian sat forward. A vessel emerged from the carrier, small compared to the Panonia II, large compared to most fighters. The design was unfamiliar. No corporate registry, no faction identification, no manufacturer signature. Definitely not something he'd ever seen before. The ship accelerated away from the carrier, then changed course, directly toward him. Julian frowned. That's probably not a coincidence. The vessel closed rapidly, its sensor suite activated. A scanning beam swept across the wayward prospect. The computer chimed. External scan detected. Julian immediately disliked where this was going. The scan completed. Several seconds passed, then a transmission arrived. Pirate identification confirmed. Julian blinked. What? A second message appeared. Threat status evaluated. A third followed immediately. Engaging hostile contact. Julian stared. Oh, come on. The unknown vessel opened fire. The first railgun round slammed into the wayward prospect's armor. The impact threw Julian sideways. Hull integrity, 84%. Warning alarms erupted throughout the bridge. The second shot arrived moments later. Hull integrity, 76%. Julian grabbed the controls. I'm not hostile. The attacking ship disagreed. Another railgun impact struck the stern. Hull integrity, 63%. Warning, critical structural damage detected. Okay, Julian activated the engines. New plan. The mining ship accelerated away from the engagement zone. The attacker pursued immediately, which was deeply unfair. The unknown ship was significantly faster, and significantly better armed, and significantly newer. Julian hated all 3 facts. Another impact struck the hull. Hull integrity, 48%. Warning, hull failure imminent. The Panonia II remained motionless in the background. Julian laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. 5 years. 5 years chasing answers. 5 years chasing rumors. 5 years trying to get home, and when he finally found the ship, it tried to kill him. That felt appropriate somehow. The attacker accelerated again, weapons charging. Julian looked at the damage reports, then the escape shuttle controls, then the damage reports again. The math wasn't complicated. The wayward prospect wasn't surviving this. Well, the computer waited. It's been a good run. The computer considered that statement. Historical data does not support this conclusion. Julian smiled despite himself. Fair. He slapped the emergency launch controls. The escape shuttle ejected from the underside of the ship. Moments later, the wayward prospect exploded. The blast lit the darkness behind him. Years of repairs, years of modifications. Years of survival, gone just like that. Julian watched the wreckage drift away. That was my ship. The computer did not respond, mostly because it was still attached to the part that exploded. The shuttle accelerated toward the nearest station, Jupiter Gate Exchange. Behind him, the unknown vessel slowed. Apparently satisfied, the Panonia II remained near the gate, silent, distant, unreachable. Julian laughed again. The universe truly was committed to the joke. Hours later, the emergency shuttle finally reached the station. Docking control immediately assigned him a berth. The moment the hatch opened, 2 station security officers were waiting. Julian immediately disliked that. Mr. Coldwell, depends, you're the pilot of the Wayward Prospect. Formally, the officer checked a datapad. You're responsible for docking Bay 17. Julian frowned. No, the officer turned the datapad around. Repair estimate, 42,118 credits. Julian stared. What happened to docking bay 17? The officer looked up. You crashed an escape shuttle into it. Julian considered that, technically speaking. Fair, the officer nodded. Excellent. Julian already hated where this conversation was heading. You owe the station money. Of course he did, because apparently losing his ship wasn't enough suffering for one day. The universe wanted an encore. Julian spent the next 3 hours discovering that station administrators were remarkably similar to corporate managers. Neither cared whose fault something was, only who was paying for it. Unfortunately, the answer appeared to be him. The station administrator reviewed the report one final time. Your vessel was destroyed. Correct. You arrived in an emergency shuttle. Also correct. You impacted docking bay 17. Julian nodded. It was an emergency. The administrator nodded. The docking bay agrees. Julian frowned. The docking bay agrees. The docking bay was damaged. That's not how agreement works. The administrator ignored him. Like every manager Julian had ever met. Repair estimate, 42,118 credits. Current account balance, 11,439 credits difference. Extremely unfortunate. Julian stared at the numbers, then stared harder. Sometimes that worked. It did not. Do I have any options? The administrator smiled. Julian immediately disliked that smile. People only smiled like that when they had found a creative way to ruin your day. As a matter of fact, yes. Of course there was a catch. There was always a catch. The administrator slid a datapad across the desk. Temporary employment agreement, station maintenance division. Julian stared, then looked up, then back down, then back up. No, the administrator folded his hands. Yes. I survived the corporation wars. Congratulations. I was attacked by aliens. Unconfirmed. They played space pong with my ship. Still unconfirmed. I got shot by a ship that came out of the Panonia II. The administrator shrugged. Very unfortunate. Julian pointed at the employment contract. And your solution is maintenance work. Correct. Julian closed his eyes. 5 years. 5 years of freedom. 5 years of piracy. 5 years of salvage. 5 years of surviving on his own terms, and somehow. He had ended up back in a corporate-style job. The universe was laughing at him. Again, what's the pay? The administrator checked the contract. Reasonable. Julian hated that answer. People who paid well never described wages as reasonable. 2 days later, Julian stood in a maintenance uniform. A maintenance uniform. An actual maintenance uniform. The station had even issued him an identification badge. Employee, Julian Coldwell. Position, maintenance technician status. Probationary. Julian stared at it, then immediately regretted learning how to read. The station supervisor approached carrying a datapad. First assignment. Julian accepted it. Work order 1. Investigate water processing irregularities. Silence. Long silence. Very long silence. No, the supervisor frowned. No. The supervisor pointed at the work order. That's your assignment. Julian looked toward the ceiling. Somewhere out there, the universe was definitely enjoying itself. The supervisor checked the datapad. Apparently water reserves keep disappearing. Julian slowly lowered his head. No, the supervisor looked confused. Is there a problem? Julian rubbed his eyes. A terrible realization was forming. The water gnomes had followed him. 5 years of drifting across the outer system. Hundreds of jumps, dozens of stations, multiple ships, and somehow they were still here. The supervisor continued talking. Engineering can't figure it out. Naturally, every time they process ice, the water vanishes. Of course it did. Then the systems get rebooted and everything starts working again. Julian stared into the distance. The supervisor frowned. You okay? No. Can you fix it? Julian sighed. Probably. Good. The supervisor walked away. Julian remained standing in the corridor. Several maintenance workers passed by. One nodded politely. Another offered a greeting. A third asked if he was new. Julian ignored all of them because somewhere deep inside the station, a water processing alarm activated. Then another. Julian slowly started walking. The maintenance corridor stretched ahead of him. Long, grey, endless. A fitting description of his life. The station intercom crackled overhead. Attention maintenance personnel. Julian already hated where this was going. Additional water processing faults have been detected. Of course they had. The intercom clicked off. Julian continued down the corridor. One step, then another. Still chasing problems, still chasing answers, still one step behind. Some things apparently never changed, and somewhere inside the station, the water gnomes laughed.